Hi! Hello, ladies, gents, and children of the singularity. Today we're going to take a thorough look at Ghost 1.0, a Metroidvania with optional roguelike elements created mostly by a single man, by the name of Francisco Tellez de Meneses, or Franfistro for short. You might know him from being the developer behind Epilogue, the 2D platforming RPG released in 2011. If this is the first time you ever heard about Ghost 1.0, well, don't feel bad. This game is pretty obscure, and I could not tell you how it ended up in my library. I must have seen it during some Steam sale or another years ago and found it interesting enough to chuck it into the cart. I'm sure glad I did though, because this is actually a great game that adds some unique mechanics to the Metroidvania formula. Let's jump aboard the Nakamura and obliterate every damn robot that we come across. Just in case you're not familiar with the genre, Metroidvania is simply a way to refer to a 2D action-adventure game with an expansive map that prominently features gated content. You explore the game world, clearing rooms and surmounting threats, and there will come a time where you hit an obstacle that you can't traverse. A locked door, a high platform, a reinforced wall, whatever. So you go exploring elsewhere, and eventually you'll find the means to get through that wall, be it a simple key or some kind of new ability that grants access. These types of games are also known for having tons of secrets you can stumble upon and a steady character progression that's tied to your progress. Ghost 1.0 features most of those basics. Gameplay is solid point-and-shoot platforming against many enemies at once, content is gated by locked doors, the keys for which are fragmented all over the game world. The map is sprawling without being maze-like, especially since you can teleport between all the save rooms, a feature I appreciated a great deal. There is a secret to finding nearly every room, which can be triggered by anything from clearing the enemies in a certain way, to shooting a wall, to walking in a certain spot. And your character will pick up new upgrades until she becomes a rolling ball of death by the end, in classic game mode. You see, there are two main game modes, and that's where the roguelike stuff comes in. You choose a mode at the very start of the game. Classic or Survival. Classic will give you a standard Metroidvania experience, with upgrades gradually doled out in limited choices. Survival, though, will make Ghost 1.0 into this weird hybrid between a Metroidvania playthrough and a series of roguelike runs, with extremely frequent randomized upgrades and consumable drops. You can become pretty overpowered and obliterate the opposition, but you will lose nearly everything if you die. You can retrieve your corpse or a few of the things you lost, but you will be feeling those deaths dearly. This is the mode I played the most, and it was a great time. You lose your upgrades on death, but all of your consumable charges get replenished, and there's a separate skill tree progression system that's persistent, so that way the difficulty can still ramp up. On the other hand, if you absolutely can't stand the terrible sense of loss that roguelikes bring about, and believe me, it feels awful to lose a powerful build in this game, you can simply play Classic, buy slower but steady upgrades and not worry about a thing. All you lose when you die in that mode is whatever unspent currency you were carrying. The other big mechanic present in the game is your nature as a ghost. You come in as an operative hired to infiltrate the giant Nakamura space station. Your character excels at controlling every android remotely, so you can leave your advanced default platform at any point and possess any of the humanoid robots in the game. It's required to solve a number of puzzles, but you can also use it creatively in combat as long as you can protect your main body, making all the enemies fight among themselves. And then there's a whole separate level towards the end of the game built entirely around it, which was not without problems, but it was pretty cool anyway. Every other feature is pretty standard fare for the genre. Rooms with enemies can become a real bullet hell. You find challenge rooms every so often with alarms you trip and you have to survive for a little while, and at the end of them you get currency in Classic as well as a new upgrade in Survival. If you want more resources, most rooms are farmable since you can respawn everything by using the save spots. Health is handled Mega Man style with an ever upgrading health bar that allows you to take multiple hits. You have a main gun with several modes that you can unlock and up to 3 secondary weapons at a time out of about a dozen or so. Ammunition is infinite, but you have to wait for it to recharge if you deplete it. On top of guns, you pick up consumables that get recharged anytime you revive. They can be extra healing or a fairly wide variety of limited time power-ups, really useful to get you out of bad situations. On top of the heavily cutscene campaign, there are also a number of standalone missions with pure gameplay challenges, meant to be completed in about 5 to 10 minutes if you're good enough to beat them. I played some, but not all of them, and every one that I played was dastardly challenging. It's an unspecified time in the future, and artificial intelligence is a thing that's happened, with literal robot maids called Nakas being a regular sight in people's households. You play as Ghost, a cyber operative hired to infiltrate the Nakamura space station and steal all of those juicy AI trade secrets for your employer. You'll use your ever-increasing firepower and amazing cyber hijacking skills to bring down every barrier and dig ever deeper into the station and the secrets within. Ghost 1.0 has a solid setup and story, but it's handled with all the subtlety of Dragon Ball Z. If you enjoy anime and its ham-fisted exposition and dialogue, you won't have a problem with how this tale is told. Cutscenes will happen fairly frequently, either when you do something important or when you're near this big yellow icon right here. Overall, I'd say the story is enjoyable, even with its ginormous plot hole and occasional thinly veiled preaching. It's all in good fun. The game sets a lighthearted tone right at the very start, and it keeps it for most of the narrative. It does try to get deep sometimes, and those are the times when a skeptic eyebrow was firmly raised. It felt like a goofy 12-year-old suddenly trying to discuss the ramifications of ruthless capitalism. Still, it's clear that the game doesn't take itself all that seriously, and neither should you. I won't discuss the whole plot beat by beat, but it's gonna be spoilers from here to the timestamp on the screen, so skip ahead if you're intrigued by the game's premise and you'd rather play through the story yourself. Alright, so you start roaming this spaceship with your mysterious employer guiding you through, and it quickly becomes apparent that this isn't a professional outfit that hired you. It turns out it's just Jacker and Bugan, a couple of guys with a get-rich-quick scheme and a bit of a beef with Nakamura, the giant mega corporation that's developed artificial intelligence.
If she finds out it's just us two, it may make teamwork more complicated.
I don't know, man. You're making it plenty complicated already. We're paying for her services, right? That fact alone should be enough for her to work with us.
Trust me, Bugan. Appearances are very important.
Do you two realize that you've left your comm lines open?
The start is actually a tutorial level to introduce you to every major mechanic, a fact I only realized once I took the giant elevator into the spaceship proper. The tutorial comes alongside some entertaining yet on-the-nose banter that very much gets you acquainted with the tone of the narrative.
Does the word stealth mean anything to you?
You said the alarms were down. Was I making a lot of noise?
Yes.
Everything's going to be spelled out, it gets a bit meta at times.
You mean we could create more robots if Ghosts gets destroyed?
That's it, man.
Jesus, it's like having infinite lives.
And conversations are as stilted as a Death Note inner monologue. And yet it manages to be charming, it really does.
More stealth.
So you roam around, get to use your ghosting abilities, trip alarms, get upgrades, all the good Metroidvania stuff, while you search for the green keycard fragments and make your way to the first boss fight. Cutscenes happen now and then, more for flavor than anything else, among which I found my first eyebrow raised.
Video game about us?
Bugan, if all this goes well, we won't be famous. No one will ever know we've been inside the NSS.
But hypothetically, what if we became famous?
Well, heroes of games tend to be male, white, and hunks. I am fat. You are black, and Ghost is female, so our chances look pretty grim.
Are you serious? What's with the discrimination?
Don't ask me. A game is supposed to sell better if the hero has that profile.
This might have been true in the 90s, maybe. It's played off as a joke, but this super edgy and insightful social commentary was terribly jarring and eye-roll worthy. I became worried this kind of stuff will be a theme, but thankfully this one is as bad as it gets. You get to the entrance of the first boss fight, and here's where you get a real taste of the anime exposition vibe.
Mr. Yamato, I've been told we have an intruder in outer heaven. Is that true?
Mimoko-san, I have it under control. Our defense system is...
Why the hell was I not informed?
Sir, with all due respect, I didn't have enough information to write a report.
And how the hell did it get in?
We suspect they bypassed our controls in the space lift.
They? How many intruders are there?
We've already destroyed a few. There shouldn't be many of them left.
Mr. Yamato, your security department is the shame of this corporation. Do whatever must be done.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that wasn't great, but now is when your sense of context needs to come in and be impressed that this was done by such a small team. instead of dismissing it as shoddy or amateurish. It's pretty good! You blow up the boss and progress into a greenhouse, where you discover Nakamura is farming these compounds to make this weird mixture for whatever nefarious purposes. As you go into the greenhouses and collect samples, you come to another cutscene spot that dumps onto you the whole backstory of how the robot body you're using came to be. It turns out that the two nerds built this combat android body from a NACA shell, and then hired you to operate it into the space station. This is told in a 4-minute long cutscene that takes you through their whole process. Don't get me wrong, I actually liked these cutscenes in general, but it was way overlong in places. Another big offender in the ham-fisted territory comes up, with the two nerds discussing AI rights as it's the most amazing piece of insight since the realization that traps are gay. Triggered!
Claims that their NACAs are indeed manufactured products, regardless of their human appearance. Therefore, they have no need for human rights or freedoms.
They're lines of code, after all. A chunk of zeros and ones.
Man, and what's our DNA? A chunk of A, C, T, and G's? If we set 00 to A, 01 to C, 10 to T, and 11 to G, we're also a chunk of ones and zeros.
Well, I see your point, but it's not the same. We are humans. They are not.
History confirms it, Jacker. Women, African Americans, animals, foreigners, people of other religions. As humanity grows, we recognize more similarities between each other, allowing us more fundamental rights. The same will happen with NACAs.
Huh. Well, let's see how the trial goes. You want to make a bet?
It's presented as if my mind is supposed to be blown away by this. Maybe I'm just not the target audience. I can see my teenager self going, "Man, that's still so deep. I never looked at it that way." Thankfully, this is the only other instance of deep chat going on in the game. Wrapping up the greenhouse area, you discover the chemical compounds being harvested are all used for mood control and depression prescriptions, processing them into this
fluid
that they pump towards the core of the station. As we are told in no uncertain terms,
"That would be terrible, sir. Without that fluid, we would lose all NACAs."
They send the giant biped to fight you, which you dispatch before he even shoots. And then, when you go into the terrible hallway of death and inevitably get crushed, you're told you should have maybe possessed the damn thing and rampage through the place.
Jesus, that corridor is a damn fortress. And they obviously reprinted that mastodon biped.
A robot like that would make it easy to clear the way, huh?
Definitely.
A shame not having one.
This made me salty with myself because I didn't think about it. It was a pretty cool way to reward your awareness of your own abilities. Because I felt so disappointed in myself, I resolved to get through the old-fashioned way, cause ain't nobody gonna tell me what I can and cannot do. After this, Ghost randomly asks how long the two operators have known each other, and the game launches into a goofy backstory sequence with them telling tall tales of their exploits. It would have been far better if it didn't last so damn long. As it stands, it felt more like filler than anything else. You make it to the labs, and through lots of possession puzzles you start shutting off valves, stopping the flow of the fluid. It cuts to a news report that Jacker and Bugan are watching. The NACAs are rising up against their masters, questioning their instructions. And so is Ghost.
And why do I have to close it?
Because we're checking, because I asked you to.
Uh-huh. And what if I won't do what you tell me?
At this point, I thought the story would continue to cleverly hint at Ghost being an AI all along, but instead it does something different. It pits the employers against her for a while, with them telling her to do things just to test out whether she's an artificial intelligence operating from the same Nakamura servers as all the other AIs are. Because you, the player, get to see both sides, it feels weird to willingly jump through their hoops so they can test and entrap the character you're playing as. It made me try to defy these mission objectives and find some way to get around them, and while there's no way to do such a thing, I still appreciate the unorthodox approach. It was an interesting dynamic, with Jacker becoming a total jerk for a while, thinking you might be a double agent, and Ghost wondering what the hell is his deal. Even the banter during gameplay is changed.
Alarm level 14.
Are you programmed to trigger alarms or what?
What?
So you do as they say, they run their test, and it turns out your signal is indeed coming from inside the space station. By this time, the Nakamura bosses are pretty pissed off at all the destruction going on inside their base, so they manage to track down Jacker through his ailing mother and get him captured. So now your infiltration mission gets put on hold. Ghost improbably hides her high-tech body somewhere in the station, and you go out into the real world on a rescue mission. This section is both cool and infuriating. You hop from robot to robot, going deeper into the facility where they're keeping the guy, and while it's pretty awesome to make progress through all the puzzles this way, it drags on for quite some time, and it also lays bare all the flaws in the controls, especially when you fight a mini-boss while using a very basic platform. It is a recurring problem in this game. Good ideas and cool gameplay that overplays its hand and overstays its welcome just a bit. With all that done, everyone comes together as super friends, and you're free to link back to the Nakamura to get your answers. By now, Ghost also realizes she's not who she thinks she is, and she's just as eager to find out what's going on. Which makes absolutely no sense. Ghost has been shown to be able to control any robot from a distance. She's jacked into the network, so to speak. So, here's a simple test for you. Try to disconnect from the system and go back to your original flesh and blood body. Or how about this? Try to remember a time when you were not jacked in. Do you have a flesh and blood body? Do you have such memories? Congratulations, you're a human. The entire mystery is all a conceit for the sake of the plot. There is a neat twist to it though. Ghost, the rest of the operatives, the Nakas, they are not artificial intelligence after all. They are preserved brains in jars, kept docile and compliant by the orange fluid.
What the hell is this? They're brains! Millions of them!
Just where did they get so many? That is kind of disturbing. Anyway, the big bad pulls out your brain among the millions and tries to destroy it in front of you. And the final boss battle is a gauntlet of defending your own brain against the assault until the nerds can put you back in with all the other brains and lose your serial number forever so they can't target you again. You succeed, the credits roll, and then there is an epilogue that repeats the whole story, just in case you couldn't understand the complicated twists and turns, you see. It does tell you about Ghost hunting down the big bad executive off screen and turning him into the police or whatever, and then the real epilogue happens, in which you spend 5 seconds talking to the nerds in person.
Of course, man. We're a team, aren't we?
Technically, yes.
What the hell?
A team? Come on. You're just two geeks with no money that played too many games by Kojima.
Ghost!
This was a story with some neat ideas, marred by a less than optimal execution. I still came out at the end with a positive impression though. Even with its zero nuance approach, it does succeed in many places to pique your interest and deliver a good story. Ghost 1.0 is trying real hard, and that matters to me. By far the star of this game for me is the choice in character progression, and I mean that in a few different ways. At a core level, you have the initial choice of either classic or survival modes. It makes for two very different game experiences, and worth playing the game twice. If you skip all the cutscenes, a second playthrough on the other mode will easily be half your first, since you know where you're going and how to solve every puzzle. Survival mode is a really cool innovation to the Metroidvania formula, and it's the feature that makes this game unique above all else. But the character progression in the standard sense is also well designed with lots of variety and choices. You have 5 different areas of improvement: consumables, things like limited time boost to damage, repair kits, temporary drones and room clears; power-ups, things like spread shot, companion drones, higher damage, poison aura, shields and so on. You lose these in survival mode when you die. Primary and secondary weapons, which are mostly what you'd expect, but there's some cool outliers like Breakthrough or the banana launcher. You also lose the secondary weapons when you die in survival mode. Permanent upgrades, the boring stuff that gives you better health and more currency pickups, and you get to keep these no matter what. And the big skill tree, where the meat of your choices is going to be made, and with lots of different options to alter your playstyle. It's in fact designed so you can't get everything in one playthrough, so there's another reason to play again through the campaign. There are an impressive amount of consumables, power-ups, and secondary weapons. I'm pretty sure I didn't get to see them all by the time I was done, and I actually farmed alarms on purpose just to get more of these items. The immense variety meant I was discovering new power-ups all the way to the end. The other mechanic that sets the game apart is the android possession. I kept forgetting it was a possibility, and every time I realized it, I thought, oh yeah, I can do that in this game, and that's so cool. Even though it's slightly overused to solve some of the puzzles, it gets a lot of the credit for making a good impression, because Ghost 1.0 would be a competent and pretty, yet rather bland game without it. Speaking of pretty, look at this thing. There's a lot of work poured into the visuals. They are very clean and kinda cutesy without becoming silly, and the animations are about as smooth as they get. And holy crap, a small team indie side-scrolling game without pixel art? Give an award to these people! Don't get me wrong, I like pixel art, but it's nice to see a developer not go that route for a change. The tutorial is actually pretty great in the sense that it didn't feel like I was playing a tutorial at all. The start of the game introduces you to every single major mechanic organically, with entertaining back and forth between you and mission control as you get acquainted with how the game plays. I mentioned the anime feel in the way the story is told, and how subtlety is not a thing you're going to experience with this tale. All the dialogue has exactly one layer, and the humor is this cutesy lame stuff that will make you groan in a good way, if that makes sense. For the longest time I was unable to figure out whether this was a purposeful stylistic choice or simply the best the writers could do. I was on the fence all the way to the very end. I just could not tell where the tone was done on purpose. I would groan at an extremely lame plot point only to appreciate it a while later. As the final hours unfolded, I fell at last on the camp of, this is the best they could do. While there is purposeful animification in the delivery, the writing during the ending is just far too heavy-handed and awkward to have happened on purpose. And about 70% of the epilogue is making sure you truly understood what just happened, as if it was some kind of cryptic plot only a genius could follow. I'm making it sound like it's this horrible cringe volcano of a story, but it really isn't. It's solid, if you have the tolerance for the way it's delivered. But here's the thing, here's why I'm talking about it in the good section. And this is very subjective, but I could just sense a sincere passion behind everything. This game is sincere. You can see honest people behind this trying to write fun dialogue and just put out everything they have to achieve the best quality they can muster. I know this sounds patronizing as all hell, but I don't know, it was just a refreshing experience all the way through. If you're not into it though, the game lets you skip every single cutscene and scripted animation. You can enjoy all the Metroidvania stuff without delving into the anime cringe fest at all. Every single game out there should have this feature, and I very much appreciate it. Another thing I appreciated a lot was the way every mechanic is explained in-universe. I'm a great fan of that. You don't teleport between save rooms, you reprint at 3D printers. You don't load your save when you die, your robot gets reprinted. Turrets and enemies don't simply respawn, actual little robots get to repair them, while capsules come down and replace the casualties after a while. This adds so much authenticity and flavor to a setting. It's great world design. If you've stuck around this far, you'll understand why the storytelling belongs in both the good and the bad section. If you can't stand the way anime constantly throws exposition at you, you will not stomach the way this story is told. It's painfully obvious in some conversations that it's just the author telling you something in two different voices going back and forth, and the humor is often innocent and simple in a Saturday morning cartoon kind of way. Like I've mentioned, I found it all real charming, but I can see how someone else might hate it. The difficulty in Classic doesn't matter as much since death isn't all that punished, but in Survival I really could have used something in between normal and hard. One kicked my ass while the other was often far too easy. I mean, this is pretty subjective, right? It's just an unfortunate mismatch between the game balance and my skill ceiling. But there's a huge gap for boss fights between normal and hard. I absolutely had to give up after a couple hours of trying. The boss went into this weird overdrive mode at the end of the fight that I just couldn't see myself ever surviving. The game lets you reduce the difficulty mid-playthrough, but not increase it. I'd much rather have the option to switch back and forth, because the rest of the game was a bit too easy after I switched it down. Every boss was almost trivial, so it didn't feel all that great to beat them. The sound effects are fine, they do their job without being obnoxious most of the time, but the music is generic and terribly repetitive. You'll be hearing this track over and over and over and over. It's not all that bad of a track, but I really didn't need to hear it 1,000 times. In survival mode, every time you trigger an alarm, the alarm level will increase, and with it the challenge you face. On levels 10 and above, these alarms have a good chance to become total bullshit, with things happening that will make it real easy to die instantly. I understand you have to increasingly challenge and overpower player, but it never felt fair when that happened. As for classic mode, the threats match your progress, but I felt it relies a bit too much on farming currency. Shops will have a number of different upgrades to purchase, and if you want every upgrade available at any point, be ready to kill the same stuff over and over for it. The controls are fine, they're responsive, and your freedom of movement is adequate, especially after spending skill points on mobility upgrades like double jump and air dash. But I dearly missed two things, and they're both related to the lackluster roll move. One is the ability to roll in mid-air, something that's somewhat fixed in the late game. With the air dash you can spend skill points to get, but it still felt kind of lacking. Two, and most importantly, I was missing invincibility frames during the roll, an actual dodge roll. It took me a while to realize the roll move doesn't avoid bullets, it simply reduces your hitbox and makes you move a little bit faster. The game is balanced with taking damage in mind, but I would have much rather had a nimble dodge roll that avoids harder hits to compensate. Lastly, the recharging ammo is sometimes infuriating, especially at the start. Be ready to run around like a moron doing long fights while you wait for your shots to charge back up. This is palliated with random drops that recharge the weapon, as well as the slow trickle of extra total shots through the game, but it still wasn't enough to keep the basic pea shooter going. The recharge mechanic is fine for all the secondary weapons, but the default gun really should have just been a good old infinite blaster. It's a real easy answer for this one. Time just flew by playing this game. I will start it up sometime in the evening with the intention to play for an hour or so, and the next time I looked at the clock it was frickin' bedtime 4 hours later. I actually finished this game in I think 4 play sessions. It's shorter than the usual for this genre, which I in fact appreciated. Sometimes I'll look at a game in the library and kinda dread starting to play it because I know it's probably going to be a 40-hour commitment or something like that. So it's nice to get something like this finished in about 10. Something that people who've grown up with games will tell you is that the older they get, the more they value quality over quantity. Long past are the days of spending 200 hours breeding the perfect chocobo in Final Fantasy. Ghost 1.0 has all the goodness of a Metroidvania in a smaller package. Between that and how refreshing the passion behind it felt, again, that's something I'm only inferring, but I want to believe it's true, damn it. It was a pleasure to stick with this game to its conclusion, despite its flaws. I'll be sure to keep an eye on whatever the hell Francisco Telles de Meneses does next. He's one talented individual with an obvious fervor for game development. So that was Ghost 1.0, and now you know why I finished it.